One viewer. One viewer. Is that you, Ed? It's somebody else. It's very exciting. But you're the only one listening. Why would I mention that? You know, you told me just now. So what's the point? Big waste of time mentioning that. So there's one viewer. Oh, two viewers. We're live now. Something exciting is happening. There's four viewers. I better behave myself. No more cursing. We'll get started in a moment. I apologize for the delay. So welcome to our special Snow Day edition of Mac Admin Monthly. Apologize for the delayed start. I'm Ed, and I'm here in the office. And Ed Marchak is joining us from home, where he is snowed in. He lives in the Yukon somewhere where you can't go outside if it snows. And we were going to talk today about some of the recent security issues that we've seen on the Mac, in particular the Sparkle updater issue, which is actually pretty serious and pretty far-ranging. We asked a colleague of ours, Anthony, to come and talk a little about it. He's been doing a lot of the work for us to mitigate the security issues involved in Sparkle Updater, and he should be here any moment. Before he comes, I'm just going to do a monologue about.
You said fireworks.
We're online, man. We're live. Fireworks. Did I say
When you
fireworks?
said fireworks, I had to go look at 2 men promoting fireworks stable today. Adobe Fireworks. And I was like, there's no fireworks.
Fireworks.
And then I realized you were talking about the conference room
It was.
fireworks.
So this is Anthony.
And who's this?
This is everybody.
Hi, everybody.
We're doing a special Snow Day edition where people don't come here.
That's cool.
I guess it is. But it was kind of hard when I had to fill in time before you arrived because I had no one to talk to. So I was just going to recite poetry.
Now, are you sure anyone's actually on the call?
There's 6 people. There's 5. Oh, someone just hung up.
Okay,
Thanks to
that's
our-
probably because I showed up.
Possibly.
So what is it that we're talking about today?
So we wanted to talk about Sparkle. Well, some recent security issues in general, but in particular Sparkle seems to be like a fairly serious issue.
Yeah, it is.
And very widespread. Like it impacts a lot of different software packages that you would normally think were very trustworthy and safe are impacted because of Sparkle. And I'm saying you have done most of the mitigation for this issue for us, and so you probably understand it as well as anybody. Let's start with what is Sparkle?
Yeah, so Sparkle, and let me just preface this by saying I'm not any security expert or any sort of like authority to really trust on this. So definitely, look up and confirm everything that I'm saying sort of on your own. Sparkle is basically this popular method or this framework of including in OS X applications which lets developers provide updates for their applications. So for something like ADM or VLC, which are popular applications, there basically is functionality in there to check for updates. And the way it does that is by using the Sparkle software, which as far as I know is open source. It's actually up on GitHub. That's actually where I was taking a look at the source code recently for the Sparkle vulnerability. The vulnerability is such that in the previous version of Sparkle, I guess it was possible to insert either JavaScript or other sort of basically remote commands that can be executed if the update check is performed over plain text HTTP, meaning that somebody can intercept and modify those contents in flight. So one of the few blog posts that I saw about it, and I think there was 2 or 3 in total, which actually had some practical examples that I tried out, and it's kind of always very scary to like actually see the vulnerability work and happen in front of you, and you kind of have like this oh shit realization moment. But kind of more generally, it's scary because it can happen in the background. I mean, a lot of these apps, they sort of run all the time. They check for updates in the background all the time, and a clever attacker wouldn't even make it apparent that the attack had taken place. And as I understand the Sparkle's vulnerability as is now, that actually is possible to either mount remote volumes, like say, for example, over NFS or AFP, and then execute commands, exfiltrate data, stuff like that. I just recommend, typing in Sparkle remote code execution, Sparkle RC into Google, and you'll see some great blog posts by, one of them is a guy called TauEffect.com, I believe. He has a pretty good, very, very ranty, which is why I like it. Kind of like, why the hell did Apple allow this sort of functionality to exist in the first place? And more generally, sort of the vulnerability or functionality, depending on how you look at it, goes more broadly than that, and has to deal with the fact that Finder likes to open certain handlers like the FTP handler, the NFS, AFP, SMB handlers kind of automatically. So if you're, say, I don't know, using Safari, for example, and you get redirected to a page that's an attacker page, and that page says, hey, go to this NFS volume, mount it, and run this command, it'll actually just do that without your interaction, without any sort of like input from you, which is kind of scary in my opinion. Now, again, this is just my understanding of it. Perhaps there's some key issue I haven't quite grasped, but this is sort of how I understand the problem to be right now. Anyway, moving on to the mitigation stage, obviously the best thing you can do is make sure you don't use HTTP. This isn't just in Sparkle, but just in general. But specifically for Sparkle, you want to make sure those SU feed URLs, which is a value in the info plist in the application for Sparkle, uses an HTTPS URL, not an HTTP like some applications like I believe Idiom, VLC, Xquartz, many of those used. So that's not always feasible. Sometimes the developer doesn't provide an SSL server to check to updates from, or sometimes they're using something like Akamai, so they haven't actually set up the certificates correctly, and the check will fail as a result. So the mitigations are either remove the update functionality either by compiling the program yourself without that functionality, without Sparkle, or by removing the SU feed URL, or simply upgrade the SU feed URL to HTTPS, which actually is what we've done here at Google, because we have just like this immense login infrastructure. We can actually see how many machines and the number of times they've checked for updates in which application and which URL they used. So we have this extremely great insight that was provided to us from the logs. So we basically just go in and declare the top, let's say 10 or 15 applications used internally. I think number one was something like Xquartz. And then just go in there and just for every single application, upgrade where possible the SU feed URL to HTTPS. And we think that's a pretty good mitigation strategy for that. I know there's a lot of applications to enumerate. There's probably hundreds that use the vulnerable version of Sparkle. So we clearly can't get them all. But security is not sort of the zero-sum game where it's a binary choice. I think if we mitigated 90% of the attack surface, that's we can call it a good day basically.
And ultimately, the vulnerability is in not necessarily is in the way Sparkle is implemented, but it's all the underlying vulnerability is actually in the OS handling of these URL handlers.
Yeah, URL handlers, and one of them is not a URL handler. It's like I actually don't know what this is. I meant to read about it, but it's like, and maybe somebody can chime in and correct me here. It's like the XXE something which lets you exfiltrate data. I don't really quite understand this one. I just haven't had time to really read up on it. But yeah, mostly it stems from the fact that the OS itself is handling these URIs in this sort of like way that's trying to be convenient for you. Like, oh, of course, let's just mount these volumes for you in Finder. It just works, right?
Magical.
It's kind of like the automatically open save files in Safari option. Like, of course, to a product manager, probably that sounded like a great idea. Like, yeah, of course, we want people to download the files and open them right away. But to somebody, with even a shred of paranoia about security, is going to say, like, you'd never want to have anything happen without your explicit interaction on the machine. And that's exactly what this vulnerability seems to be all about. And I've actually been hanging out on the macadmin.org Slack channel. There's a security channel in there, which is really great if you're not a part of that community. Definitely join. Really cool. And there's been a lot of talk and discussion about that back and forth, and people having all sorts of different mitigation ideas. So come and join the fun and see what other people are saying and discussing there as well.
Cool. I should also plug our Slack channel, which is macadmins.slack.com. It's MacAdmin Monthly on macadmins.slack.com.
Right. So macadmins.org will take you to the kind of the public Slack channel, in which there are many sort of different rooms you can join.
Yeah, and we're one of them.
I think our room is quite dead, actually, so it would be nice to see some new faces.
No, it's great.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, we all the time are always in there.
So in the short term, the fastest mitigation for the Sparkle issue is to update the software update URLs if you can, and turn off Sparkle where you can.
Yeah, when you use an HTTPS URL and an attacker still tries to sort of hack at you this way, actually Sparkle will complain and say the certificate that was served was incorrect, so therefore it cannot check for update, which is good. That means you're safe. And like I mentioned earlier, there's tests for this that you can basically go and do and figure out which apps are vulnerable and which aren't. It's quite straightforward. All you basically need is some sort of even local web server will probably do the trick. So yeah, the number one mitigation is obviously, well, first of all, in fact, I should say, I think the Sparkle updater framework has been patched to avoid this problem. And again, I'm not speaking authoritatively, but I think that's just what I read or heard somebody say. So some applications are now being updated with a new Sparkle framework that isn't affected by this. But the immediate kind of short-term, I think, mitigation would be to either remove the update functionality altogether by taking out the SUFeed URL, or if you have that fine-grained controls over the Macs you manage, definitely go in there and change that HTTP to HTTPS. Now, I do want to warn you, again, like I said earlier, some applications don't support checking for updates over HTTPS.
Right.
So you may actually end up inadvertently breaking updates. But you may decide that's better than having this vulnerability, depending on your enterprise or whatnot. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's kind of basically it.
Okay.
Oh, right. And the other thing I wanted to mention is there's a very, very handy utility called Duty, D-U-T-I, and it basically lets you manage file handlers on OS X. Yeah, I know I said Duty. So what we've done as another mitigation, kind of in addition to this and similar bugs like it, is set the handler for things like FTP, NFS, AFP, Samba shares to actually not open in Safari, not open in Finder, because they seem to, through these convenience methods, be able to execute them out automatically.
Right.
So we actually just set those to, I think, Chrome. And when they go through Chrome, Chrome basically pops up with a window saying, I don't know how to handle AFP. Would you like to launch Finder? And you have the options of clicking cancel or launch. And the idea kind of behind that is at least you're giving the user a warning that something is happening, perhaps that they didn't intend to. Of course, some people will probably still click, yeah, sure. Page says click, wants to open AFP. Why not? So it's not perfect, but I think it's another good strategy to keep in mind for this and future bugs like it.
Cool. So the other topic that we wanted to talk to you about was securing files using YubiKey.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see.
Ed did. I don't know. Is it interesting?
I guess it can be interesting. I mean, so a YubiKey is kind of like this general umbrella term for a lot of things. I mean, so for those of you that don't know what a YubiKey is basically this USB device. It kind of looks like this. There's different versions of it. Yeah, Ed's got the nano size there, and I think, well, we do use them at Google a lot. I think we can talk about them being used at Google. We use them as a two-factor authentication method, and you can actually set this up with your public Google account, your Gmail account. So if you're tired of copying codes from your phone or from some hardware token, you can basically buy one of these, keep it in your computer. That one never leaves your computer, or it's very hard. Looks like we're still here. But if you use something like a YubiKey, if you store your hardware or if you store your key material on this or any sort of other smart card, there's many other manufacturers. I just think this one is the most convenient and the best one. You would actually be quite safe. So yeah, you can definitely encrypt files with GPG using the key that on here. You can encrypt mail with GPG. Trammell Hudson, I don't know if the viewers are familiar with him, but he's just a super smart engineer. He actually has a page on his site about setting up the YubiKey exactly for that purpose on his website. That's trmm.net, like trim.the.net/YubiKey. Take a look on there. He shows you how to integrate it with GPG mail, and I think it's quite a fascinating thing to do. You can also use this for SSH authentication, either as another second factor authentication device, which we do at Google actually, or just as or just using one of the keys, the authentication key versus the encryption and signing keys to actually authenticate you to the SSH server. So there's two different ways you can do it. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for fun uses for YubiKey. And if you don't have one, I think these are something like $40 on Amazon. I know it maybe seems steep, but I mean, this thing is very versatile. It has 2 programmable slots in addition to the OTP mode that it's able to be used. It probably has some other functionality that's cool that I'm not thinking of now. But there's one that's NFC enabled, so you can use it on your Android device. I don't think iOS supports NFC, right? I think they're going the Bluetooth route.
God, someone else here would know. If anyone else was here, they would be able to answer that question, but it's just us.
Yeah, it's just us.
We have no idea.
Or so we think.
Yeah.
That's sort of the short and how on it.
It's pretty cool.
I think that's what he was asking about, right? I actually just recently discovered all this for myself. Like I said, we use them at Google internally for authentication, for SSH, for all sorts of different operations. But I just recently bought one for myself just for fun, and I'm like just blown away by all the different use cases for this. I just think it's very, very.
And I have to say, I bought. There's an even cheaper one, just for doing 2-factor authentication for things like
the YubiKey,
email,
yeah,
YubiKey, like a really cheap.
I think it's a U2F one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
And I bought them for. I bought them for most people in my family.
Oh, really?
Because I was tired of getting emails from my father saying that he was in Paris and I needed $3,000 really fast. So I gave them to my family for the holidays last year, or year before this last one. Some of them started using them, some of them didn't, but
That's
it's
cool.
still a huge step over just using passwords for Gmail.
And what I want to say is if you actually use SMS second factor authentication for something like logging into your Google account, actually that's not quite as secure as I think many people think, because SMS is quite easy to intercept, obviously by like nation state actors and whatever, but this may be a practical concern to you depending on who you are and like what sort of you're trying to protect yourself against. So when it comes to like if you want hardware encryption, hardware key storage, like YubiKey is definitely a way to go. I'm not being paid by YubiKey to say this or anything. I'm just like, I just don't know of anyone else who puts out a good product like this, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. So that's something to brag about, I think.
Yeah, it's been very effective.
Yeah.
And I've switched all my personal accounts to use YubiKey second factor authentication, and it's really easy.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, I'm much more likely to have the key with me than to have my phone with me.
Exactly. And another thing is if you use a password manager, and first of all, if you don't use a password manager, you like absolutely need to use one, because like otherwise what are you doing? Just remembering passwords for 20, 30 different sites?
Or setting all your passwords to be the same.
Or even worse, setting the passwords to be the same on all of them. So if you are using password manager, this key actually lets you program, I think, up to a 32-character just random string. So I actually don't know any of my passwords to any account. And anytime I do need it, I just plug this in, I hold the key down, and it kind of emits this 32-character string that is my passwords to the vault of passwords, which has the other passwords. So that's pretty cool. And this thing like never leaves my pocket. Or at least I don't think it will leave my pocket. But in case it does, I bought a second one and I programmed it just like this one. So if it's lost, I'm like not totally fucked.
But they're on the same key ring.
No, these are different ones. The other one's locked in the drawer somewhere.
That's sensible.
Encased in cement.
My mother actually just told me the other day that she was so proud she had finally set all her passwords to the same thing. She said it would take her a long time to change them all, but now they're all the same.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
And it's like 8 characters, and it's a word.
I've been teaching my girlfriend sort of like password best practices, right? Because she liked to use like, a word in her birthday. And I'm like, okay, well, at least try to like, put the password in a castle that are exclamation marks. Like that will make your password so much more secure, just having some random characters versus some guessable word and thing. And like, so I don't know, there's just a slight tangent on that. But passwords are really interesting, but also kind of these archaic things that I know internally we hope to eradicate, but I think everyone would be happy to see them completely go away in favor of like public key encryption, of client certificates if you're using something like TLS, for authentication, something like U2F, and all these other wonderful technologies that are coming out. But yeah, definitely check out YubiKey if you don't already. If not for personal use, definitely for your professional capacities.
Cool. In fact, I just had 2 recent upgrades to 1Password, which is the password vault I use. They finally added fingerprint recognition on Android.
Oh wow!
Which is a huge.
So you unlock it with a finger,
right? Which they've had on iOS for a long time, and obviously it's not as good as the password, but the password I have to unlock my vault is pretty strong, and entering it on the phone is a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But having access to my passwords on my phone is a huge help.
That's very cool.
So it's probably lowers the security but increases the usability. And then they now have shared group. You can make a shared group vault.
That could be useful.
But it's useful for me so I can share with my family. I can give them the password to our Amazon account and our Netflix account, and I can keep it up. I can change it without torturing them too much. But also, I can force them to use 1Password by only giving them the password.
That's a good idea. That way, they have to
if they want Netflix,
do the best practices.
If they want Netflix, they have to use 1Password.
That's great.
So hopefully, it'll move in the right direction.
I think ultimately, in 10 years, all this talk of using password managers and all this other stuff will seem so hilarious, and it'll just be the end of jokes. Yeah. Remember when you had to go and or even going back further, when you had to go and remember your passwords? Oh, yeah. Weren't those the days?
Remember when your password was always written down on a Post-it?
Right, under your desk.
Under your desk.
How did you know about that?
I spent a lot of time under your desk.
Yeah. What were we talking about?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I think that's true. I think that, as security becomes more and more... I mean, I'm so surprised at the number of people I meet who don't lock, their phones don't lock.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, well, you get your email on that.
Yeah.
So I could reset your bank password.
Anything, yeah.
I could figure out where you bank, and then I can reset your bank password.
Right.
So
yeah, that's why I'm so glad for these. I actually just got this Nexus 5X, and it's got the fingerprint reader on the back, and it's like, at first I thought this is so stupid, use fingerprint, but after a few times of using it, it's like by the time I reach in my pocket, put my finger on the scanner, and pull the phone out, it's already unlocked.
Yep.
I don't have to enter a 6-digit code or whatever. So
yeah, it's something that's
a huge step in the right direction for authentication in general.
That the iPhone
and I think iPhone did it first, right?
Yeah, they got it right. There were fingerprint readers on some older Android phones, but they were just terrible.
Yeah,
and they weren't built in at the OS level, so they were functionally not very secure.
And one interesting story I read the other day was actually that if you take your iPhone for repair or iOS device for repairs at an unauthorized dealer, they basically disable your phone. And what that has to do with is the fingerprint sensor basically has access to the secure enclave on the phone. And if they somehow tamper or remove it or anything like that, it kind of just bricks the entire phone so that they can't go and replace the fingerprints sensor with something kind of like an ATM skim pad, basically, right? So just really interesting. I'm really impressed with the attention to detail and security that Apple seems to pay to iOS. I have some complaints about how they treat security on OS X, but as far as iOS, it's clearly a first-class citizen for them, and I think they're just doing amazing work with stuff like that. Though I know many people will disagree and say with the iPhone repair stuff, that may be a bit of sort of a paternal guiding hand over what you can and can't do with the device you purchased.
Sometimes that's good.
Sometimes that's good, that's bad. But ultimately, security is this constant struggle between usability and this sort of complete lockdown where the machine's not even powered on. And I know if our security department had their way, none of our Macs would ever even be turned on, right? Let alone connected to the internet, let alone using, a web browser.
Right.
So it's this constant sliding scale.
In fact, Ed just pinged me. He's, well, where do you keep your 1Password vault? So the actual vault file I sync using Dropbox. So obviously I'm putting a huge amount of trust into Dropbox and into the file format that 1Password uses. Yeah. And eventually, of course, one of those might break. But and the truth is, if you had hold of that file, it doesn't matter how good the format is. Eventually, you'd be able to crack it. Well, yeah, like you said, it really depends on the implementation of the encryption. And I don't use any of the mainstream password managers. I just sort of use GPG and this little shell script to manage just one little file. But I think the premise is sort of the same, right? It's this encrypted container. You can sync it any way you want it to. I think you're doing a good thing by having both the data encrypted, and it's sort of protected that only your account, your Dropbox account is able to access that file. But even if it weren't, even if it was a public file, it wouldn't be the end of the world if it was posted on the front page of the New York Times, because it's just an encrypted container. Now, depending on how well the encryption is implemented, it may or may not be breakable. And of course, in 100 years' time, when we have quantum computing, it will probably be a complete joke to break. It also depends who wants to break it. It depends who wants to break it, right? So, I mean, the first question in security is what is your threat model? Who are you trying to protect what against? You don't just ask the question well, is it secure? Is it safe, right? It's kind of a meaningless metric. You need to say, well, is it secure against this adversary spending this amount of effort trying to break in or trying to steal or trying to do XYZ thing? Or anyway, at least that's how I choose to look at it. I think that's very sensible. you can't protect against all threats, but you have to protect against the threats that you're actually likely to face, and
and have that security in layers, right? Like you said, like you have the
Right.
encrypted container on sort of, you have the on an authenticated sort of like channel, that nobody can get to. So I'd say it's pretty easy to handle your password securely these days. I don't see any
And I have to
major
say one
reservations
thing.
about it.
I mean, I think all the commercial, as far as I know, most of the commercial password vault systems
LastPass,
are
1Pass,
1Pass
yeah.
are all pretty good. But one thing about 1Password is that they also give you alerts. Like every time, I feel like every time I go to get my LinkedIn password, they tell me, "Oh, LinkedIn's been hacked since the last time you
Yeah,
did this.
yeah.
You should change your password
Yeah.
again." So at least that.
That's really funny.
Yeah, and which is great. And actually, I have to say, it's LinkedIn being hacked that got me to start using 1Password. I had a handful of passwords I should have used before, and then finally it's like, oh, I really should use non-memorable.
Do some good hygiene. Yeah.
And that got me to change all my passwords. So
I think something similar like that happened to me, except when I went to go change all my passwords, I had decided, all right, I'm going to use a 20 character, 40 character string. And it's amazing how many websites don't let you do that. Like Schwab, for example. I'm not picking on Schwab, but they're a particular, like an egregious example of this.
considering
Only lowercase letters or numbers and a maximum of 8 characters or digits. Like that's the top password you can have. And when I call them about it, I'm like, how the hell are you guys storing passwords? Like in the database, plain text? And they're like, don't worry, sir, like we monitor your account 24/7. This sort of like response that totally left a lot to be desired. But
don't worry, sir, we have no idea.
Even when you want to be like, or you think you want to be secure, like sometimes you even have like the thing you're trying to protect working against you. That's not true for all accounts, but I know for a lot of websites, they don't really let you choose any passwords. But yeah, a good password would have numbers, upper, lowercase, just complete junk, basically, something you don't know.
And the longer, the better.
Yeah, and the longer, the better.
With passwords.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I mean, I think getting people, I mean, I understand the resistance to using strong passwords, but I feel like talking to non-professionals, it's the number one thing. It's like, yeah, I can't be bothered. I just use my kid's name. Or
I think it's one of those things that once you make the initial effort and just do it and just see how easy it is, whether it's something like, even like I was saying earlier, like making your password just a little bit more complicated by adding some characters to it, or going that extra step and like maybe using a password manager, or going even one extra step and using something like a YubiKey to hold the secret key to decrypt your password safe or whatever. I think just making those incremental changes every once in a while, like you're going to see the benefit of it. And the great thing is once you make these changes, like you're not going to go back and use the old method because you're not used to using this.
Right.
And
it's not really any harder.
For me personally, it's like I just pick a weekend when I'm not doing anything. I'm like, this weekend I'm going to just try to do it a little bit better than I'm already doing it. Just try to iterate on the process a little bit more and try to make it fun. Like, try to make it interesting. And I don't know. I just find this stuff personally fascinating and interesting, but like you say, some people, they just can't be bothered. Maybe it's not that interesting to them, which is totally understandable. Not everybody needs to be like a complete bona fide nerd that's obsessed with this sort of stuff.
That's true. All right. Well, thank you for talking about SlashWorld and security, and thank you, our many viewers.
Our many 5 to 6. I even saw 7 viewers at a certain point.
Up to 7 viewers. So thank you, up to 7 of you.
I hope we didn't bore anybody.
I don't care.
I don't care if we did either.
Yeah.
Nope.
But we'll be back next month with our normally scheduled, probably in person and on Hangout meeting. And I have no idea what we'll be talking about.
Something interesting, no doubt. And
fascinating.
Definitely check out the Slack channel. Besides just the Mac Admins NYC channel, there are lots of other great ones to ask Bash questions, Puppet questions, Monkey questions, if you're into that sort of thing. So come be a part of the fun.
The Slack world.
The Slack world, yeah. Would you like to tell a joke before we end the broadcast?
Why'd the chicken cross the road?
I'm not sure.
Get to the idiot's house.
That's funny.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
It's the chicken.
Fuck. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.